Dial O for Hero, Chapter 1. The first question. Oran Z. Belgrave's earliest memory was a patchwork of sunshine and laughter. He was only 6 months old, lying in a playpen beneath the warm Nebraska sky, as the summer of 1952 buzzed gently around him. The air in his great-grandmother Ora Douglas's backyard smelled of cut grass and sweet hibiscus. Sunlight draped through the leaves of an old oak tree, casting dappled patterns over baby Oran's curious hazel eyes. He gurgled in delight as a little girl named Sandra, a toddler neighbor, who lived in the back tenant house, which was a 2-story building with 3 apartments on each floor. It was colored pink, and Grandma's house was colored yellow. Sandra, with bright braids, peeked through the playpen bars. Sandra giggled and gently poked at Oran's chubby cheek, teasing him with a silly face. In that moment, even as an infant, Oran felt the world reaching out to him in playfulness and love. He couldn't speak, but he grasped Sandra's tiny finger in his hand and laughed. Above them, Great-Grandma Ora's soft humming floated on the breeze, a hymn to Jehovah God she often sang while hanging laundry. The baby didn't understand the words, but the melody of faith and the girl's laughter imprinted on his soul. This was the dawn of Oran's awareness. A world of light, love, heritage, and wonder. 5 years later, a biting winter wind rattled the loose window panes of the Hilltop Projects. 2414. N31 is Saint in Omaha. It was December 1956, and 5-year-old Oran pressed his face against the frosty glass, watching dusk creep in on Christmas Eve. Inside, the living room was sparse and humble. There was no Christmas tree, no twinkling lights or piles of presents, just the faint aroma of cornbread baking and the steady tick of a clock. Oran's family had faced hard times that year. Money was tight. Santa Claus, he'd been told, was running a bit late. Oran hugged his knees to his chest as he sat by the window. He could see the neighbor's house across the yard, trimmed with cheerful lights. Shadows of the neighbors dancing and celebrating played out on their curtains like a joyful puppet show. Santa comes tomorrow for them, he thought, his young heart heavy with confusion. Earlier that evening, Mama had taken Oran onto her lap and carefully explained that Santa Claus would come on January honest instead of Christmas Day for their family. Santa has a special schedule for us this year, she said softly, not quite meeting his eyes. She tried to sound cheerful, but Oran sensed the sadness behind her words. At 5, he was perceptive beyond his years. He had seen Mama's weary smile as she counted crumpled dollar bills at the kitchen table. He knew something was wrong, even if he couldn't name it. Why January honest? Oran had asked, wide-eyed. In his mind, Santa was magical but also reliable every Dec 25, without fail. That's what all the kids at school said. Mama gently smoothed his hair. Her eyes glistened with tears she tried to hide. Well, baby, sometimes Santa has to help other families first, she answered. But he will come for you. He just needs a little more time. Oran heard the tremble in her voice. He wasn't sure if Santa was really delayed, or if this was Mama's way of saying there might not be any presents this Christmas. That night, Oran crawled into bed under a worn quilt. His breath was warm in the cold room as he whispered into the darkness, Jesus, are you listening? At 5, he'd often heard his grandmother pray to Jesus and Jehovah for strength. He wasn't entirely sure how prayer worked, but it felt as comforting as Great-Grandma Ora's hymns. I don't need lots of toys. I just want to know what's true, he murmured. Mama said Santa will come later. Is that true? Are you true? He waited, eyes squeezed shut. The only reply was the distant sound of a train whistle and the creaking of the house in the wind. Still, as Oran drifted to sleep, he felt a strange peace, as if someone warm and loving had wrapped an arm around his small shoulders. In his dreams, images fluttered. He saw himself as a baby in the sun, Grandma Oa's face above him, and a figure of light he imagined to be Jesus, gently smiling. New Year's Day arrived, on a cloudless, frigid morning. Oran dashed to the small stocking hung by the window he had insisted on hanging it, even if it was almost empty. To his surprise, there was something inside. A single toy car, painted bright blue, and a handwritten note. He recognized his mother's neat cursive. He couldn't read all the words yet, but he knew it said, Love, Santa, at the end. His heart swelled with gratitude and heartache all at once. He loved the toy, but he knew in that instant who Santa really was. The realization settled gently. Mama was Santa. Maybe Great-Grandma and Daddy and others all pitched in. There was no jolly man in a red suit coming down their non-existent chimney. The magic was a story his family kept alive, even when they had so little, to make him happy. Oran was young, but he understood the tender lie for what it was like, an act of love. He held the little blue car in one hand and the note in the other. Part of him felt like crying. Santa Claus wasn't real. That magical certainty of childhood wavered. As that belief crumbled, something else took root. He remembered his whisper in the dark. Jesus, are you true? If Santa was a well-meant make-believe, what about Jesus Christ? The question hit Oran with the weight of a 5-year-old's world. Was Jesus just another story too? Across the room, Grandma Ora sat in her rocking chair, watching him quietly. She wore a thick shawl, and her wise, weathered face carried the strength of their African and Native American ancestry. Little Z, she called him gently, using the nickname Z that the family sometimes affectionately added to Oran's name. My other favorite grandma was Sadie Hazar. Nickname for me was Udi Kazudi. I hated it, but all my cousins loved to call Ma that because they knew I hated it. Come here, child. Oran walked over, clutching his new toy. Great-Grandma Ora pulled him into a warm embrace, the rocker squeaking softly beneath them. He looked up at her, eyes earnest and searching. Grandma, he asked in a small voice. Mama wrote this, didn't she? Santa didn't really come. Ora Douglas' face was full of empathy. She had never encouraged the Santa tale, being a devout Christian woman, but she also understood a child's innocent hopes. Your mama loves you so much, she said, tapping the note. She wanted to make sure you had something to smile about. Oran nodded, appreciating the gift and love behind it, but his mind was fixed on the bigger question. Grandma, what about Jesus? People talk about Santa and Jesus. I can't see either of them. Is Jesus real? His voice wavered, as if he feared the answer. Grandma Ora's eyes lit with gentle conviction. Oh yes, Jesus is real, she whispered, hugging him closer. Santa is a fun story, my dear, a tale of giving, but Jesus Christ is the truth. She reached for the old family Bible on the side table, its leather cover cracked from decades of use. Flipping to a page, she pointed to an illustration of baby Jesus in the manger. See this? Jesus was a real baby, who grew up to teach us about Jehovah's love. He is as real as you and me. Jesus is the one we must pray through, to pray to his Father, Jehovah. He gives us hope when things are hard. Oran traced the image with his finger thoughtfully. He thought of his whisper in the dark. Maybe that peace I felt was Jesus hearing me. In that moment, sitting on Grandma's lap, Oran felt something warm ignite inside his chest, like a small flame of faith. He realized that while Santa might not be real, love is real. His mother's love, which provided the New Year's gift, was real. His grandmother's faith, which filled the house with hymns even when food was sparse, was real. And if love was real, perhaps the source of love, God and Christ, were real too. That afternoon, while Mama and Grandma were occupied in the kitchen, Oran did something that surprised them. He gathered a few scraps of colored paper from an old magazine and a stubby pencil. With tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth in concentration, he drew a picture as best he could. A glowing star above a stable, the baby Jesus in a manger, and a few stick-figure shepherds kneeling. Beside them, he drew a family, a little boy holding a toy car, a mother, and a grandmother, all kneeling too. It wasn't perfect art, just the earnest scrawls of a 5-year-old, but it came from his heart. When he presented this handmade gift to his mother, her eyes welled up. It's beautiful, Oran, she whispered, kneeling down to hug him tightly. He felt her tears warm against his cheek. They were not tears of sadness now, but of joy and pride. I wanted to give you something, Oran said, shyly pointing at baby Jesus in the drawing. Because Jesus is more important than Santa, and we already have love, right? His mother could barely speak, nodding and holding him close. In that embrace, Oran felt a deep sense of rightness. It was as if God smiled down on that humble living room where truth had gently won over make-believe. From that day on, Oran Z. Belgrave was a boy on a spiritual journey. The question of Santa versus Jesus became the first stepping stone toward his lifelong pursuit of truth. He began to accompany Grandma Ora to every church meeting or Bible study she would allow him to attend. Me and my mother met a lady named Sister Thelma Cannoli, who was with the Jehovah's Witnesses, called a full-time pioneer. She was also an herbalist, and she had a health food and vitamin store in North Omaha on 24th Street. Often, I went to the Kingdom Hall with other Jehovah's Witnesses, for Oran's family had roots in that faith, and they also visited a local church for Sunday school now and then. Oran didn't care where he learned, as long as he could hear more about God and history and the way to live right. He was ravenous for wisdom. By the time he was 6, he could recite the names of all the books of the Bible in order. By 7, he was reading Bible stories aloud, not just for himself, but for other kids in the neighborhood, even acting them out with a flair for drama and detail that drew laughs and applause. I also started to give Bible readings and talk over the stage at the local Kingdom Hall that was on 30th and Maple, right across the street from Howard Kennedy Grade School. The Kingdom Hall building itself looked like a drawing from the Watchtower magazine at a youth age. I thought that was the Watchtower Bible. And Tract Society, although it was just a building full of love. I tried to translate my own copy of the Bible that I would get in Greek and Hebrew and the Dead Sea Scrolls into an English that I could read and understand, far be it from the King James Version of the Bible. but in the modern-day version of the word so I use, the Strong's Bible Diaglott along with others, and learned many things like and John 1, when they talk about in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was a God, and the Word was with God. It had two different spellings for the two different gods. He was a child of many gifts. In those post-war years in Omaha, African American and Native American families like his often faced prejudice and hardship, but Oran's household brimmed with culture and creativity. His mother and great-grandmother made sure he knew his heritage. Some evenings, Grandma Ora would tell him stories about his ancestors, tales of great-grandpa, who had been a black cowboy on the Great Plains, and my great-grandmother, who was a Native American healer in her tribe. "You come from strong people, child," she would say, as Oran listened with eyes wide. People who survived slavery with their faith intact, and people who walked the trail of tears yet still prayed to God. Their blood runs in you. Oran cherished these stories. In his mind, he could see those ancestors standing behind him, offering their guidance and strength. It made him proud of being African and Native American, carrying two legacies in one small body. It also made him feel responsible for honoring them by helping others and doing what's right. He practiced kindness and nonviolence in the smallest of ways, even when other kids might roughhouse or argue. Once, in second grade, Oran found two boys quarreling fiercely over a seat on the swings. Other children gathered in a circle, expecting a fight. Oran stepped between the angry boys, his hands raised not in anger but in calm reasoning. "We can take turns," he insisted, his voice clear and steady. He said it with such simple conviction that the two boys blinked, their fists lowering. Something about a 7-year-old speaking like a wise old soul made everyone pause. The tension broke. One boy snickered, the other shrugged. Amazingly, the fight just evaporated. They ended up pushing each other on the swings, laughing, while Oran walked away with a grin. He didn't fully understand it, but he had just used peace to solve a problem, and it felt good. It felt natural. By the time Oran was 8 years old, people in his community were beginning to notice that this young boy was special. He had an old soul, they said. He was the kid who would help an elder carry groceries up the steps, or spend his afternoon reading books about African kings or native legends when other kids were playing stickball. He also loved to create things. Often, Oran could be found tinkering in the garage with his stepfather, Mr. Belgrave, who was a mechanic. Together, they turned old scrapwood into furniture or fixed broken radios. Oran's little hands were surprisingly skilled, and his mind brimmed with ideas. In the corner of the garage, he even set up a makeshift workshop for himself. Jars of nails and bolts he'd collected, a hammer with a splintered handle, and bits of wire. One summer day, after learning in school about Alexander Graham Bell, Oran rigged up a telephone using 2 tin cans and a length of string. He convinced his friend from next door to take one can and stretch the string taut between their bedroom windows. Giggling through the improvised phone line, they whispered secrets and made plans, marveling that their voices could carry across the distance. It wasn't magic. It was a bit of science and a bit of ingenuity. But to Oran, it felt like a miracle of connection. He didn't know it then, but this impulse to connect with others in need, to have a direct line, so to speak, would become a hallmark of his life. All the while, Oran's spiritual insight deepened. He asked questions constantly. Why did David fight Goliath instead of finding a peaceful way? How can we love our enemies, like Jesus said, when they are mean to us? The adults did their best to answer, but sometimes they found themselves learning from him. Oran would nod thoughtfully at their explanations and then add, "I think it means we have to be brave and kind at the same time. Or, maybe if we show people love, they won't want to be our enemies." Out of the mouths of babes came wisdom that left grown-ups speechless. It was around this time that Oran began to feel a calling, a quiet, persistent voice in his heart urging him to do more for God. One Sunday after services at a small local church, a congregation his family occasionally visited for fellowship, Oran tugged on the sleeve of the minister, Reverend Johnson. The towering gray-haired pastor knelt to meet Oran's earnest gaze. "Reverend," Oran said, I want to help. I want to tell people about the truth, about Jesus, like you do." There was a moment of silence in the bustling church hall as the old reverend studied the boy's face. Seeing nothing but sincerity, the reverend broke into a warm smile. "Well now," he said, patting Oran's shoulder, "you are a little minister already, aren't you?" Word spread quickly through the community that little Oran wanted to preach. Some chuckled at the idea of a child giving a sermon. Others were intrigued. Grandma Ora and Oran's mother prayed on it and felt moved to encourage him. Who were they to stand in the way if God's hand was on the boy? Over the next year, Reverend Johnson and the elders gave Oran opportunities to speak in front of small groups, like the children's Bible study, and occasionally a few minutes at the end of Sunday service. At first, Oran's knees would tremble behind the pulpit. A step stool had to be placed so he could be seen. But once he started speaking, that tremble vanished. He talked about truth. He talked about how he learned that Jesus is real, even if Santa is not. In simple words, he shared how that discovery changed his heart and filled him with hope. He quoted verses he had memorized and told stories, sometimes even acting out a scene from David and Goliath or Daniel in the lion's den to make the message come alive. The congregation was enthralled. It wasn't just cute, it was powerful. Some folks said they felt chills, moved by the Spirit, hearing such conviction from a child. On March 8, 1961, at the Civic Auditorium in Omaha, NE, Oran Z. Belgrave formally became an ordained minister at the age of 9. The whole congregation was singing "Take Sides with Jehovah," a fitting choice. His mother was also ordained the same day later on, barely containing her pride. The brother spoke to the gathering about faith and courage, about how even a child can lead when God calls him. Oran would always use his gifts for truth, justice, and healing, that he would remain humble and loving, and that he would be a light to all who knew him. Oran's heart pounded with joy. He felt a warmth on his shoulders where the brother's hands rested, almost like a mantle being passed. In that moment, he thought of the boy prophet Samuel from the Bible, who heard God's voice as a child. He thought of King Josiah, who as a boy king restored true worship in ancient Israel. Oran felt connected to those stories, youthful heroes of faith who answered God's call early. Oran turned to face the congregation, his friends, family, neighbors, and mentors. His eyes scanned the crowd, and for a split second, he thought he saw them. The gentle faces of his ancestors, standing in the back, beaming with pride. He saw in his mind's eye an African forefather in humble overalls, and a Native American foremother in a woven shawl, both smiling at him. Whether it was imagination or something more, Oran felt their approval deep in his spirit. He blinked, and the image was gone, replaced by the actual figures of Mama and Sister Gwendolyn Victoria, rushing up to embrace him in front of everyone. Laughter and tears mingled as the boy was passed around in hugs and pats on the back. "You did good, baby. You did so good," his mother whispered, holding him tight. Oran simply smiled a radiant smile, the little light inside him shining brighter than ever. That evening, after the celebrations died down, 9-year-old Oran sat on the front stoop of his house, dangling his legs, looking at the stars that began to prick the indigo sky. The neighborhood was quiet. He clutched the leather-bound Bible with his name embossed in gold, Oran D. Belgrave. The Z stood for nothing in particular. It was a tribute to his uniqueness, inspired by heroes like Malcolm X, who chose a letter to represent a legacy unknown. To Oran, the Z was also a little lightning bolt of individuality, something that set him apart. He ran his fingers over the gilt letters thoughtfully. So much had happened in his short life, yet he felt like it was only the beginning. "Jehovah," he prayed softly, eyes turned heavenward. "Thank you for today. I'm still just a boy, but I want to help people, like your son Jesus did. Please show me how. In Jesus Christ's name, amen." The night was still. Oran listened, not with his ears, but with that heart that had guided him since he was 5. And in the silence, he felt an answer. A calm, resolute feeling that one day his prayer would be answered in ways he could not imagine. He had a purpose to use truth, history, art, and faith to uplift others, to answer their calls for help. He didn't know how, but he knew why, because love demanded it, because God had given him gifts to share. In the distance, an owl hooted from an old oak tree, perhaps the very same tree that had shaded his playpen as a baby. Oran smiled, remembering that sunlit memory of Grandma Ora and little Sandra. From the playpen to the pulpit in 9 years, he thought, with a tiny grin. What next? As if in reply, the wind picked up for a moment, rustling through the grass. Oran imagined it carried whispers of the future. He could almost hear the echoes of crowds and distant voices. In his mind's eye, he saw a flicker of scenes yet to come. Thousands of men gathered in Washington, D.C., united in purpose and prayer under the banner of a 1,000,000-man march. He saw himself much older, standing among them, eyes closed in reverent solidarity. He saw another throng on the National Mall, a second march on Washington, where he saw people that marched for justice and jobs alongside people of all colors, walking in the footsteps of Dr. King's dream. He saw fields teeming with music lovers himself as a young man dancing barefoot in the mud at Woodstock, and later swaying to blues and banjos at a Wadena Rock Festival under an Iowa summer sun, and cheering with a crowd at the sprawling Celebration of Life Festival in Louisiana, the air thick with heat and harmony. He saw a montage of vibrant images, canvases splashed with paint in an artist's loft, a classroom at the Studio Academy where he hunched over a drafting table learning his craft, the astonished face of the legendary Saul Bass offering him a handshake and a job after spotting Oran's talent, and then Oran, with a polite smile, shaking his head and declining because he was determined to finish his education first. He saw himself as a grown man, tall and calm-eyed, standing before shipping containers that housed a museum's treasures of Black history, his museum preserving the struggles and triumphs of his people. He even glimpsed a strange, sleek smartphone in his hand, ringing with a special call, as if fate itself had its own phone number. These visions flashed by like trailer scenes for the movie of his life, leaving Oren breathless. A sudden ring of the telephone inside the house jolted Oren from his reverie. He hopped up and ran indoors as Mama answered. It was a neighbor calling for a bit of help, and of course Oren was already tugging on his coat to go with her and assist. As he hurried out, he cast one last look at the telephone on the side table. It sat quietly now, a black rotary phone with the letters printed above the numbers. His eyes lingered on the O, which shared the number 6 on the dial. It made him grin. "Oh, for Oren," he mused. In his heart he made a promise. Whenever someone calls for help, I will answer. It was a promise he intended to keep, for he understood now that this was his calling in life to be there for others, armed with knowledge, creativity, and faith. Little did Oren know just how literal that promise would become. In the years ahead, people from all walks of life would indeed call on him in their times of need. Every ring of the phone, every knock on his door, every plea that reached his ears would be an opportunity to transform, not with magic, but with truth and love, into whatever hero they needed him to be. His childhood had prepared him well. He had learned the difference between comforting fiction and empowering truth, between violence and peace, between despair and unwavering faith. The foundation was set. As the first chapter of Oren Z. Belgrave's journey closes, a new one opens on the horizon. The stage is set for a life of service and adventure, guided by divine purpose. The boy who once questioned Santa now knew where his true strength came from. And somewhere, out in the world, a person in trouble would soon dial the letter O on their telephone, not knowing that a hero would answer on the other end. Oren Z. Belgrave smiled into the twilight, ready for whatever God had in store. The phone will ring, the call will come, and Oren will be there to answer it. To be continued.